won't you share the stream with me? So, some folks have been asking, where's my video on Netflix's Sandman? Well, I've actually already shot it. If you support me on my Patreon, you've already been able to watch it because it's up in early access there. The thing is, it's not going to appear here on the break room because I actually had enough thoughts about it that I wanted to do something bigger. So I did a video for the main channel over on Council of Geeks that will be going up this Saturday. Or if you go support me on the Patreon, you can watch it right now. But I do think what is appropriate to do here is to talk about the little extra episode that they released, which does 2 of the standalone stories from the comic run. Those being Dream of a Thousand Cats, which might be one of my favorite single issues from the entire run of Sandman, and Calliope. So this was really interesting to watch, both for the episode itself and the way that it adapted these stories, but additionally in the way that this kind of fits into how additional seasons might move forward. It's worth noting that at this point in time, at time of recording, a second season has not been confirmed yet. Basically, Neil Gaiman even came out and said this. What it amounts to is this is a very expensive series to produce. So even though the show has had great reviews, really good fan reaction, and has been like top rated on the platform for several weeks now, that's not enough on its own. It needs to really have legs because otherwise it's going to be a case of, look, it did well, but it needed to do even better to justify the cost. Basically, it's what happened with The Dark Crystal, Age of Resistance, which is another show that was great, but it needed better ratings than it got for how expensive it was. We might be looking at that for Sandman, which also means we're probably not going to hear about a next season renewal for a little while yet, because they're going to wait and see how it plays out over the long term. That all having been said, if this is how they want to integrate some of the best of the little insular stories that Dream is a supporting character at most in, this is a really neat way to do it. Because in terms of covering the overarching stories, I figure they can get 3, maybe 4 seasons out of what they've got here. Because there's the stories they already did, there's Seasons of Mist, there's the thing with Destruction, maybe a Game of You, and then you wrap. I mean, and I would say probably do Game of You and the Destruction thing together, or maybe even Game of You and Seasons of Mist. You could integrate those two, and then you do the Kindly Ones that. and the last volume as your closer, and then you're done. But that would, in theory, leave all these little stories, these little self-contained things that all take place within the realms of the dreaming, and Morpheus might have an appearance, but aren't about him really. And I just kind of assumed that we just wouldn't get those. But to do something like this, drop a little bonus episode to highlight, again, some of the best, that's a really cool idea. And the animation style that they chose for Dream of a Thousand Cats, I think, works well. Everything is well put together visually. I'm a little disappointed that they opted not to animate any mouth movement on the cats, that you just kind of hear a voice. That having been said, that probably did quite a bit to keep the cost of it down. So it's understandable, and I do get it. But that's really my only critique. I think it was really well done and well adapted, and just visually really sold what I like about that story, because I really like that story a lot. And that one's adapted pretty much straight. Very few alterations that I caught. Calliope actually has quite a few alterations, relatively minor. The core of it, absolutely unaltered. And if you either join my Patreon and watch the Sandman video I've got, or you wait until Saturday to see it come out, my focus is on how these stories have been adapted. Because, yeah, they've been adapted pretty dang well. And here there are a number of minor tweaks that, well, first of all, the acting is really good in this. It was good in Dream of a Thousand Cats as well, but here, we get to see the actors, and so we get a lot of actors who I really like Arthur Darvill, like Derek Jacobi, and everybody's good in this. But there's, again, a lot of little minor tweaks that make the story still mean the same thing, but to feel just a little bit different. So if you haven't read the original, some of these minor tweaks, and I am going to talk about what goes on in this straight up. I could basically praise Dream of a Thousand Cats without spoiling it. This I kind of have to. So this whole story with a muse being captured and then used by men to inspire them and inspire their stories, who don't see her as a person, only as a means to an end, that end being their art and fame and recognition and praise and everything that comes along with it. So you have this writer, played very well by Arthur Darvill. And in the original, when he first comes into possession of Calliope, because she's basically passed on to him from another writer, first of all, she is much more sexualized and dehumanized in the comic. And I don't mean that as a knock on the comic. That was a deliberate choice. And for what the comic was going for and how harsh it wanted to be in a very short amount of time. Like, keep in mind, this is slightly more fleshed out for this episode with the amount of time that they have to do it, whereas versus how long it takes to read the comic issue. But in the comic, we first meet Calliope. She's naked. You know, she's stripped and kept in this dingy place, and she's not kept in a great place in this, but like, she's at least granted clothes. In the comic, the character of Maddox immediately, like, it literally, the line is, the first thing he did was force himself on her. That's the first thing he did once he had her back at his place. That doesn't happen here. He's actually, I think it was an interesting choice to make him hesitant, reluctant even, to try and find a way to get her to inspire him that didn't involve forcing himself on her. But when push came to shove, and she basically said, the only way that will happen is if you free me and then do what old poets used to do, and to beg and to plead for my influence and my inspiration, and I may grant it to you, without the guarantee that he wanted to be able to write great stories. He'd rather force himself on her. And it makes him a more rounded character while still retaining that awfulness about him. And I feel like, I'd have to double check line for line, but I also feel like the episode really makes a point of hammering on his hypocrisy and the show of inclusion and feminism that he makes, claiming himself to be a feminist author. You know, one of his books getting adapted into a movie, and him insisting that, you know, the cast and the crew be 50% women with really good diversity. It's like putting on a show, even as he regularly strips a woman of her agency and her choice and her freedom. And the naked hypocrisy of that, I think, was a good note to put a little more emphasis on, put a little twist into, especially as Maddox branches into film, because certainly in the last decade or so, we've had plenty of people who, regardless of the face that they showed and the public image they cultivated, did awful things behind the scene that were sometimes in complete contradiction to who they wanted the world to see them as. So I think that was a good aspect to massage a little bit. One of the more interesting things is that at the end, in this version, Calliope asks Dream to release him of the punishment Dream instilled on him. Because Dream basically says, you want ideas? I will give them to you in abundance. And ideas just come to him so fast that he can't handle it. And in the comic, it's just left at that. In this, she says you can release him from that. Which at first I was kind of like, what are we doing here? But I appreciate that she makes the very clear distinction when Dream asks her, are you forgiving him? And she says, I will not forgive his actions. I will not forgive what he did. I am going to forgive the man so that I can move forward. I'm not entirely sure if I agree with that assessment and that approach. However, I do think it is really worth acknowledging that there can be a distinction between forgiving a person but not ever forgiving actions, actually forgiving what was done, but maybe deciding there is no need for further retribution. But that does not mean that they are forgiven. I think that is an interesting balance to strike, and one that this manages to do decently. Because otherwise it risks getting into, especially considering she says, like, you know, I need to be able to heal and something like that. It brushed right up against the barriers of something that I hate, which is this idea of you have to forgive the people who have harmed you as part of your own healing. And I'm not going to say there's no value in that, but I have a real big problem with how frequently that is pushed as this idea of, well, you have to forgive people. No, you don't. No, you don't. And this manages to avoid diving headlong into that area I have issues with by making a distinction of, well, she is going to forgive the person, but not the action. It does not become okay. But she is going to say, I don't need him punished anymore. And honestly, I can be all right with that, because that is her saying, whatever was going to be gained by me from him being punishment, I've gotten. I don't need anymore. You know what? She can make that call. And nobody told her, you have to let him go, you have to forgive him. She made that decision. That was her choice. And I think that's what makes it work. It's a fine line this thing walks, though. Most assuredly. But it's good. And it just gives me one more reason to really hope this gets more seasons, because there are other little short stories that I would like to see adapted further on down the line. And even if this is all we get, even if this is just like a little extra treat at the end, that's a nice little extra treat. Episode 11 of Netflix's Sandman. A Dream of a Thousand Cats and Calliope. What did you think of these stories? What did you think of them in and of themselves? What did you think of them as adaptations? If you know the original comics, whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon, I've mentioned it already, but it is in fact what pays the bills around here. So any help you can give would be incredibly helpful. There's a link down in the description in addition to the, my mentioning it before. But even if you can't do that, like, share, subscribe, they help as well. But even that, don't worry too much. We take a relaxed attitude around here, so you can just come on back next time you need a break.
Time to give my thanks to my highest supporting patrons. That would include Robin Moore, Zubin Lutfullah, Tarak, the thing that goes doink in the anime, Oliver B., Melinda Walters, Emu Delkey, Theotha Boyd, Becky Sparks, Fernabi Likes the Poodle, Zach, Idolin, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperl, Adam RDL Taylor, Shane Ross, Shaylee Gourlay, Brendan LaRose, and TT. If you want your name said while these guys try and distract me, consider looking at the rewards of my Patreon.